African Ascent, your television program that operates from the great city of Melrose, Massachusetts, which is supported by the remarkable services of individuals such as Dr. Michael Minor, Professor of Security Studies at Harvard University, presents you a Top Gun from Brown University, the great Paget Henry. Born to make revolutionary remarks, in the previous episode, he had contended that what we witnessed after the tragic death of George Floyd was not merely a moody outcome of a tumultuous period in American history, but rather what he called an insurrection. Now, today's episode returns to that claim and had asked the good professor to link it both to liberalism and neoliberalism, which came immediately after it, and try to see what the relationships might be between the neo-liberal project and the idea of insurrection, which is a description that Paget Henry gave to these tumultuous protests that continue to flood to a limited degree this time, quite naturally, American and global cities. So welcome to episode 2, as we dissect objectively and with careful details what neoliberalism is and what it is not. African Ascent welcomes Professor Paget Henry from Brown University, a professor of simultaneously philosophy and sociology. Welcome to African Ascent, Professor Paget Henry.
Thank you, my brother Teodros. Thank you, thank you. And let me respond as quickly and as directly as I can to your question. To put neoliberalism in perspective, I think we have to begin by noting that, like all economic systems, capitalism has its crisis tendencies. Crises of overproduction, crises of converting produced goods into money, et cetera, et cetera. There are various ways of characterizing these crises. However, these crises, if they are major, they lead to interruptions in production. Interruptions in productions that produce job losses, unemployment, decline in profits. In other words, a downturn. Some of these downturns are major and some are minor. Right? To understand neoliberalism and the rise of neoliberalism, we have to examine the major downturn that led to its institutionalization as integral parts of so many Western and non-Western economies. So to me, the crisis of the 1970s that led to the rise of neoliberalism was a crisis not quite on the order of the crisis of the 1930s, but certainly a major downturn, right? So we have to understand the nature of this downturn and who led the response to it, what were the reforms that they demanded. Just as at the height of the 1930s, we had a group of reformers, basically Keynesian reformers, right, who created the post-war, post-1945 American and European economies. So if we look at the early 1970s, right, we've got several things operating here that's going to bring the Keynesian period to an end. We've got the fact that the United States can no longer back its dollars by gold, right? This was the foundation of the financial system that mediated trade, that trading was done on this financial system. Gold backed the US dollar, $35 an ounce. And on that system, in the US banking system, about 40 to 50% of the dollars were in fact backed by gold. By 1968, something like around between 20 and 25% of the dollars were backed by gold. So the money supply in the US was growing at a rate that the US could not keep up the requirement of backing a certain percentage of these dollars by gold. And that disrupts trading as we knew it in the post-war period. So that's the first major thing. Now, if you do away with the gold standard, what happens? People are going to start printing money, right? And as you print money, right, you have more dollars chasing, hopefully, an increasing volume of goods. If not, you're going to get inflation. And that is exactly what we had in the 1970s, rising inflation, right? Now, if you got rising inflation, it means that the value of money, right, its purchasing power, I should say, to be more accurate, is declining. And so if you are the holders of large amounts of money, you're going to be looking for somewhere to hedge your money in a period of high inflation. And so we see this. And as a result of this, the first group of people to begin to revolt were shareholders, the people who had shares in companies, right? The dividends they were getting on their shares began to not necessarily decline numerically, but to decline in purchasing power. So the value of the money, right, for people who are holding money becomes a major problem. So people are shifting to gold, they're shifting to bonds, they're looking to hedge, they're buying art, great works of art, maybe great philosophy books like the ones you're writing, Brother Teodros. This may become a hedge, a hedge against inflation. So this was a big crisis. How to contain the inflationary effect of the United States going off the gold standard. Third, we have the increasing power of trade unions and the cost of labor. Fourth, rising competition from Japan in particular and the Asian tigers. Right? And so this is changing dramatically the economic environment that was created in 1945, the so-called Bretton Woods economy, grounded on Keynesian principles, right? So these are the factors that brought the Keynesian phase, the Bretton Woods phase, to an end. That you could no longer generate profits. You could no longer produce goods and turn them into cash readily and easily under this system anymore. And so the shareholders were the first to revolt and to demand a change. And it is their demand for change that is going to usher in what we call neoliberalism.
Excellent. Now, let me break in Professor Paget. This was remarkable, characteristically brilliant. Now, there are those who are contending that there are at least 5 major crises, I'm drawing from Eric Wolf, that the American economy and also global economy are undergoing. An ecological crisis, a business cycle crisis, a racist crisis, an unemployment crisis and a health crisis. Then there are those who contend that to a significant extent, neoliberalism is directly responsible for the construction of these five crises. That's one argument. And there are those who contend that neoliberalism might have produced these crises, but it couldn't have done that were it not for this spectacular pandemic crisis that came from the back door. And in that, the turmoil that American cities are undergoing now is a confluence of a racial pandemic and a neoliberal pandemic, they contend. I would like you to comment on these crises and directly relate them to what you so beautifully outlined, the genealogy of liberalism slash neoliberalism itself, the way in which, and in addition to the health pandemic, neoliberalism has been hatching and brewing, as it were, for years since the Great Depression to produce these five major crises.
Well, I'd see all of them interrelated, except for the coronavirus panic. That when you have rising debt levels and so forth, when it becomes difficult to convert the goods you're producing into cash, so then you can do what you want, economically speaking, then you're in a crisis phase. And once you're in a crisis phase, you're going to have businesses maneuvering. They are going to lay off workers. They are going to maybe shift to new areas. Anyway, they're going to strategize so that they can return their business to desirable profit levels, et cetera, et cetera. So this crisis period, of the 1970s that I outlined, I think it's a very specific crisis period. And I would not attribute what we are going through now to that. In fact, I would attribute what we're going through now to the collapse of the neoliberal order. That I think the neoliberal order is collapsing and collapsing quite rapidly. If we look at what happened during the neoliberal order, we see some very substantial changes in the organization of economies. So first of all, you get a shift from Keynes to the economic paradigms of Friedrich Hayek, and Milton Friedman, right? And within this broad framework, right, and as the way they like to put it, it's a shift from demand-side economics to supply-side economics, right? We got the following things. One, we got the deindustrialization of the American economy. That is, the industrial productive base of the American economy is now going to be located abroad. And America is going to become primarily a service economy backed up by high tech. Along with that, we got, and to me, this is the essence of globalization now. We got the global liberalization of both commodity and financial markets. This is the big policy change, right? That if we look at economic markets prior to 1980, right? They consist of all kinds of leftovers from the age of European empire, right? so that Caribbean and African countries had special trading relations with their ex-colonial powers, right? They would get into the markets of these former imperial powers on special conditions. Neoliberalism ended all of that. The WTO became the big trade organization. It became like the United Nations of trading, right? It oversaw all of the rules of the game. And so trading relations had to meet the standards of the WTO. And these were now that we were going to open up, liberalize all commodity and financial markets, right? So in other words, if you've got a job in a high school in Ethiopia, that job should be open to everybody in the world, from Japan, from China, from the US, everywhere.
Disastrous.
That's the new change. That's the different policy change, right? And the WTO was in charge of overseeing all of this. Now, as I said, it was the liberalization not only of commodity markets but of financial markets also. So, as a matter of fact, as a result, the U.S. and Britain became the most. They really financialized their economy. The finance sector became the dominant sector of the US and British economies. So they were the quintessential neoliberal economies, right? And if you look at it for a while, particularly the US, they did very well, right? But even though the economy grew, there were a whole lot of problems. And we saw that it was the level of inequality, that dramatic increases in inequality that came with this neoliberalizing of both of these economies that began to create a whole lot of problems.
Okay, right? Let's interrupt then, Professor Paget Henry. So perhaps then we could linger a bit for the sake of our viewers and talk about globalization and financialization outcomes of the neoliberal project that led to this present crisis. So let's begin with globalization and then link it to financialization. And viewers want to know what these terms are, please.
Sure. Okay. Now, as I said, prior to this experiment with globalizing all markets, right? You had the leftovers of the European systems of empire, right?
Yes.
Where, for example, in the case of the Caribbean, we were exporters of sugar, bananas, stuff like that. But we had a special in to the British market, right? Because of this historic colonial relationship. The French Caribbean had special relationships with France.
Mm-hmm.
Puerto Rico had special relations with the US. As you know, Puerto Ricans are citizens of the US. They can come and go. The rest of us in the Caribbean can't do that. So depending on who colonized you, that now determined your trading partners, your trading options, and so forth.
I see.
That is what neoliberalism was trying to get rid of.
I see.
It attempted to wipe that out.
I see.
So I'm sure you remember the terms, the Uruguay round of trade negotiations, the Doha round of negotiations.
Please summarize them for us, please.
Yes, these were meetings at which the trade ministers of all of the participating countries would get together and try to determine the terms under which these markets would be globalized. So they would meet and they would talk about, okay, how are we going to globalize the market for rice, the market for cornmeal, market for sugar, uh, any commodity. And the whole idea was to set up these terms under which every commodity would be globalized. And they would be formalized in the rules of the WTO. And these are the rules everybody should follow. And this was the grand experiment that began in the 1980s.
And who determines the prices and the living wages that are going to be paid to these new workers?
Oh, the markets.
The market.
That's the whole thing, right?
That's market fundamentalism.
This was market fundamentalism cubed. Market fundamentalism to agree that we've never had it before. Now, I should point out that this was not the first attempt to do this, that the British tried to do this from about 1842 right up to the start of the First World War, that this order was an order that the British tried to impose on the world. I thought it was very interesting that the nation that had the strongest objection to this at the time and did not participate in this neoliberal free market experiment was the United States.
Incredible.
They looked at it and they said, This is not
of Friedman, the grandfather of the
right?
neoliberal paradigm.
So this is one of the reasons why this is called neoliberalism.
I see.
Because it's the second experiment of this type.
A departure from classical liberalism.
Yeah, and the British experiment. Yes. So now by financialization, basically what we mean is that you are going to make the financial sector the dominant sector of your economy. Right? That the position here was that industry, remember the old saying, what's good for GM is good for the country?
That's right.
That era was now over, right? What's good for Goldman Sachs is good for the country. This is the new era. This is the era of finance, what Lenin would call finance capitalism. We are in 1980, ushered in this era of finance capitalism, right? And we're still there. But what I'm suggesting is that this is the era that is now ending. And we can get into lots of the reasons why I think it's ending. I don't know if...
I would like to know.
Yeah. Well, if you look at it, right, and where we are, the first thing that signaled for me the end of this era was the 2008 financial collapse. That really showed you the house of mortgage cards upon which this edifice was built. And it was not a very good edifice because of the kind of cavalier attitude that a lot of lenders in particular had towards debt. Now, think about it. If finance is your dominant sector, you're only going to make money if lots and lots of people are in debt.
I see.
Because you're making money, you're not producing anything.
I see.
So to make money, to make profits, it has to be interest payments or some other kind of payment related to credit cards, banking, writing checks, whatever. So this is the era in which everybody now could have access to a credit card. And I can remember when I was an undergraduate at City College, none of my fellow students had a credit card, right?
We didn't even know what they looked like.
Exactly. But in the era of finance capitalism,
Everybody
everybody gets a credit card. I don't know if, well, you might remember this, but Citibank launched what they call the craving card. Indulge your cravings. Never mind savings. We've got a cravings card.
Craving card.
So this
You
was
become a desiring being in philosophical terms. Not a rational the buyer, but a desiring being who desires without necessarily paying the outcome of those desires.
Right. So we had this lax attitude towards getting people in debt.
Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, we had the transformation of education, right, as a debt-oriented activity, that it became normal for people to take out student loans, go into debt in order to get a BA, right? So we have students graduating today with a BA, and at the same time, 50, 60, 70, 80, up to $100,000 of indebtedness. So the fact that the finance sector became the dominant sector, right? You have this skyrocketing increase in overall indebtedness. Because if people don't go into debt, you can't make any money. Right?
I have to ask you this question, Professor Paget Henry. I was listening to an entire program on Point with an economist who is now speculating that the next crisis this time is not going to be guided by the craving for mortgages. Rather, it's going to be a craving for loans. I cannot tell you how many companies are calling me to give me loans, Paget, and I'll be dead then to be able to pay them. They don't particularly care. They just want me to have this loan.
Have the loans, right? Now, notice this began, right, in the 1970s with the Latin American countries. Remember the Latin American debt crisis?
Yes.
It began that way, right? Where banks had all of this surplus cash on their hands. There was no industrial, productive way to invest the capital. So then they started offering the money to third world countries. So all of a sudden, you would apply to these banks and you'd say, oh, I want a $10 million loan. They say, $10 million? That's nothing, man. We give you 20. Double it.
Please take them.
Please take it. And all of a sudden, Latin American countries were in over their heads in debt. And so we had this Latin American debt crisis. And so that was one of the first signs of the new financial order that we're in. And then, as you know, you had the Asian crisis before, after the Latin American debt crisis. And then, of course, after the Asian crisis, we had the 2008 crisis in the United States. And of course, we had minor debt crises in smaller countries. Like we in the Caribbean went through our debt crisis, Jamaica in particular, major debt crisis. So all of a sudden, right, all of these countries are having debt crises. And they're having debt crises because they've taken out more loans than they can pay back. Not only that, the interest rate keeps changing.
That's right.
Right? So when you take out the loan at a certain time, you can pay it. And then all of a sudden, with the shift in situations in the financial market,
you cannot any longer.
You cannot any longer.
So you remain in debt.
So you remain in debt, all this stuff, right? So this is now life in the era of finance capitalism, right? Now, when you're on the gold standard, this could never happen. The gold standard prevented these levels of indebtedness. I mean, I don't think it'd be too technical to go into the details now, but that's why this is new, right? This would never have happened during the thing. Okay, so we have the 2008 crisis, right? And why do I say this is the beginning of the end of neoliberalism? Okay. Now, remember, this is supposed to be a market-driven model of economic management.
With state intervention.
With minimal state intervention. Minimal.
Intervention. That's the departure from the classical liberal model. Right. That did not have the state intervene in anything. So Milton Friedman comes up with the idea of let's have minimal state intervention.
Okay. Right. And the job of the state in Milton Friedman, the only thing you do is regulate the money supply.
That's right.
That's the only thing the state is allowed to do. Right? Okay. Now, if we look at the role of the state after 2008, we see that the role of the state just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding. We are no longer in a market-regulated, market-controlled economy. It's the central banks of the major countries that are now in charge of these economies. Remember Alan Greenspan?
Yes.
I mean, Wall Street hung on every word of Alan Greenspan, right? Now, it's what's his name? Powell, right? The Fed chair, right? The same thing in the European Union. It's Draghi, and then whoever replaced Draghi. These economies are being controlled and led since 2008 by central banks. Now, the policies by which central banks direct these economies come to be known as quantitative easing, right? Quantitative easing is a policy by which the Federal Reserve pumps a certain amount of money into the financial sector every month, right? So when the United States was doing quantitative easing, it was around $60, billion or so every month that the federal government would pump into the financial sector. Now, you have to ask yourself the question, where is this money coming from? Right? Now, in 2008, when quantitative easing started, the Federal Reserve Bank, its balance sheet was $800 billion. $800 billion, right? But yet still, the Fed pumped trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars into the financial sector. The EU pumped trillions of euros into its financial sector. Japan, England, They did the same thing. Together, they pumped $66 trillion into the financial sector.
Incredible.
Right? So where's this money coming from? So I'm telling you, man, they printed the money.
Yes. It displays the gold standard.
You know,
There is no gold standard. So
there's no
print
gold
money.
standard. This is printed money, right?
Yes.
Now, when they print the money, they buy assets, right? And by purchasing these assets, right, they give a boost to the stock market. They give a boost to real estate values and a whole host of other financial assets.
They empower banks to give loans.
Of course, you know, but notice what they're doing. They are keeping up the value of assets that are traded on Wall Street.
Incredible.
Right? That's the key thing. Right? Now,
so there is no competition.
well, no. There's monopoly competition.
Milton Friedman was hoping that the state would be a referee that would regulate an open environment of competition.
Well, you have so many monopolies now.
Yes.
It's hard to talk about real competition.
Competition, exactly.
Huh? Because all of the players know each other.
That's right.
They invite each other over for dinner. And over dinner, what do you think they're talking about?
Sure, of course.
What are you going to charge next year, man? Tell me, right? Which is what they're not supposed to be doing in a market economy, right?
Precisely.
But okay, let me just finish up here about quantitative easing.
Please.
Right? Now, since the pandemic, right? I don't know if you've been listening to Jay Powell, the Fed chair, of late.
I have been.
But he did something that every American, in fact, everybody in the world, should take note of. Right? He said to Wall Street, you know, he says, look, no matter what you do, we will cover you.
Yes.
We will backstop. You will never fail as long as the Fed is here. This is a dramatic change. So on Wall Street, they call it quantitative infinity.
Quantitative infinity.
No longer
Easy.
Quantitative easing.
Infinite potential.
Right? Quantitative infinity.
Infinity.
Now, what do they mean by that? They have discovered that at this particular point in time, if you have dollars, yen, euros, pounds, because these are global currencies, these countries can print money and it will not lead to inflation.
Unbelievable.
Now, the question of why it doesn't lead to inflation, I must say I don't fully understand. A lot of people are debating why. There's a big debate around it. But the bottom line is that right now, the US can print money. And that's why Jay Powell could say to Wall Street,
of course,
no matter what, I got your back.
Infinite potential of printing money, Paget.
Absolute quantitative infinity.
Infinity.
That's the current policy, right? Now, everybody knows that something like this cannot last forever. So the question is, what is it in the current configuration of the global economy that has made this possible? Now, the explanation that you see most often is that it's globalization. That because the United States is not buying goods, and Europe, and not buying goods produced by their unionized workers, you see, but buying goods produced by cheap labor that is non-unionized across the globe.
I see.
You say you don't get the inflationary, or what economists call the wage push inflation that you would have if they were using American, British, French, labor. Because if companies are making profits, the unions are going to demand increases for their workers because they want to share in that increase, right? So if you look at wages in the United States since 1980, they are flat. Flat.
Yes.
You see? And so that's why you're not getting this inflationary effect. You see, if the workers were sharing in the growth in national income since 1980, since the neoliberal period, right? Then they would have more money to spend, and therefore would help to drive wages up, and also they would be demanding higher wages.
That's right.
You see? So some people are saying that's the reason why the US and Britain, Japan, and the EU can print money in this way, right? Quantitative infinity and no inflation. So my position is that this is a very special moment in American economic history. And we should be up in arms that Jay Powell has taken it upon himself to give it all to Wall Street. Why is Wall Street the only guarantee of access to this capacity of the Fed to print money indefinitely? I'm saying Wall Street didn't create this by themselves. All hardworking Americans have helped to create this. Not only that, but a whole lot of workers in the periphery, in Ethiopia, in China, right?
In Antigua, the great nation of Antigua. Blue waters.
Have helped to create this unique situation.
Okay. Now.
No. Let me just finish it. And please. I'm saying we should be demanding that this special moment, that this capacity, how to use it, should be democratically decided.
Now, let me intervene, Professor Paget. And that's exactly where I want to go. I know you're extremely busy. We're going to do another episode with you and Neil Roberts and discuss the future.
Right.
But beyond neoliberalism, this should be a top-notch hypothesis of, as you were about to say, how we should convert this moment into a new future.
Of course.
And the rise of a new consciousness.
Right.
That's what I would like to do with you and Neil Roberts, maybe 2 or 3 weeks from now. After you, the great Victor Wallace would come to discuss differences between insurrections, pre-revolutionary movements, and revolutionary movements. And then I'm going to come back to you and Neil Roberts to discuss a vision for the future.
Oh, yeah.
Don't neoliberalism is what I would like to call that episode.
No. It's collapsing. So whether we have an alternative or the American ruling elites will determine this other, there is going to be an alternative. Right? So it's up to us to begin to think about what we would like the future to be. And I'm saying, I don't know, however long this period of quantitative infinity lasts, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, that capacity to print this money should be democratically decided. The working class should get a commitment, not just Wall Street. The middle class should get a commitment. African Americans, right, should. This is the time we could say that reparations is on the table, Marshall Plan for Black America, whatever. This is the time.
Now, my final question before we part company, just a brief answer, because this will be part and parcel of the discussion of beyond neoliberalism. How capable do you think is the American potential president, namely Biden, to carry out this project, this new project? Is he capable? There were some capabilities in Sanders. He was thinking about the future beyond neoliberalism. Do you think Biden is capable?
Well, okay. Ideologically, he has not indicated that he's thinking along these lines. I think for the future, what we need at the political level is a post-Trump Republican Party,
okay,
and a post-Clinton Democratic
Party. Post both.
Yes, that Clinton redefined the Democratic Party as a conservative Democratic Party. And in making that move, he, in fact, joined the
neoliberal project. He becomes its new voice.
Exactly. And not only that, what was so disappointing, adopted and added to its policies of mass incarceration.
And the curtailment of benefits, social security benefits.
Oh, yeah. That he was going to downsize
the working class.
Yeah, he was going to downsize the welfare system.
That's
I don't like that term. I much prefer the European term, the social safety net.
Me too. I agree with you.
That every society needs a social safety net. In the neoliberal era, they've been trying to do away with that completely. And I think Clinton narrowed the Democratic Party's conception of the social safety net. Obama did not significantly broaden it.
No, he didn't.
Right? He made commitments to try and save the middle class. That this is where he saw the impact, the negative impact of neoliberalism, and attempted to counter it. But he really didn't make any headway with rescuing the middle class, as you know.
He sacrificed poor people, as a matter of fact.
Oh,
the term poverty.
No.
Was briefly forgotten.
Both Clinton and Obama had nothing to do for the working class.
Absolutely.
Nothing. And that is why wages, as I said, in both of those periods remained flat.
Okay.
So when I say we need a post-Clinton Democratic Party, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I haven't heard anything from Biden.
Not at all.
That would let me figure that he knows now in what direction he has to reform the Democratic Party.
What?
No, but you see, because this is an insurrection, and the pressure from below is rising in unpredictable ways. Look at all of the statues that are coming down, right? Who would have ever thought? In fact, today, the mayor of Providence announced a reparations program.
Amazing.
Yes.
Well, African Ascent, like all extraordinary matters, is proud to share with my viewers that this is one of my best substantive episodes with the great political economist, Paget from Brown University. I thank you from my heart for lingering with my questions, answering them, accommodating my journalistic rudeness of intervening with questions smoothly and respectfully. I cannot wait until you visit with us in about a month from now. And this time, we'll be thinking about the global future. This has been your host, Theodros Kiros, for African Ascent.